All right, Sam, let's go to the pass catchers. Biggest name in free agency is always it's going to be Tee Higgins, obviously. Um, Bengals still have a decision to make as far as franchise tag, re-signing him, figuring out what they want to do there. But if we add up receivers and tight ends, it's not a great tight end class either. I think Mike Gesicki, another Bengal, is interesting. He had a nice season this year, but it's mostly receivers. But it's a lot of receivers who, again, this is tricky when you're analyzing the NFL, separating the name from what they are right now. Tee Higgins is in his prime. But if we look at the other big names, Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, all of those guys are huge names, once number one-ish type of players. Godwin, 1/2, whatever you want to call them, but they're not the same players. Godwin coming off of a big injury. Amari Cooper was just brought into Buffalo to, rejuvenate their passing attack. He wasn't a huge part of what they did. Stephon Diggs, power move by the Texans this offseason, played pretty well, wasn't great, then gets hurt. DeAndre Hopkins, big move by the Chiefs to bring him in, wasn't a big part of what they did, had 1 or 2 games where he made a significant impact. So it is a whole bunch of retread, former ones. And for receiver, Sam, this isn't the position where you tend to dip and then come back, right? It's not a position where it's like, oh man, we thought this guy had lost it. Now all of a sudden it's like, turn back the clock 8 years. So this is, to me, it's a buyer beware type of free agent receiver class.
Yeah, I mean, Higgins is the only guy still clearly in their prime who doesn't have, some significant question marks. Like Godwin is still, I think, in his prime, but the dude has had a couple of nasty injuries in the last couple of years. So that's obviously his question mark. Higgins is the cleanest available option. He's in his prime. He doesn't have a massive injury history, though he does have some that maybe people overlook a little bit.
He's missed a lot of time. He's missed a lot of time.
So it's not like but he hasn't had a knee blown apart the way, other of these wide receivers have. And he's young enough that we're not concerned by that, dropping off or anything. So he's, again, it's a bit like the quarterback position. He's the obvious star, the obvious prize to be had with this free agent group. With Higgins, obviously, though, the big thing is you've got, I don't know that I've seen too many times a quarterback exerting that kind of pressure on the organization to keep a different player in the building, right? Joe Burrow has been incredibly consistent and vocal about wanting to keep Tee Higgins around, right? And, I mean, look.
Did you see him with Big Cat, by the way? He was on with Big Cat. He was on with Big Cat explaining contract restructures and how they would do it, right? It was more than hey, Mike Brown, bring these guys back. He's like, all right, we'll restructure the deals and we'll push money to forward. We'll add void years. I mean, he was doing a whole bunch of stuff, which, by the way, Cincinnati doesn't do historically. Right. He was really pushing. He was playing Howie in Philly and encouraging Cincinnati to start playing that game, which was pay the cash up front and push the cap and, make it all work.
Which is interesting for a couple of reasons, right? Number one, again, as we said, I don't remember it too many times where a quarterback has put that kind of pressure on their organization publicly. Number two, Burrow's contract has already sort of forced Cincinnati to start doing some things that they don't normally do, right? He has already broken rules that the Bengals have typically had in terms of how they handle their contracts. His deal is the type of deal that they don't sign previously. So they've already sort of made exceptions, or at least whether it's made exceptions or they've started to modernize, they've started to act the way the rest of the NFL does, because Burrow is so special. They've okay, this is the guy, we will do it because Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. So if he was able to make them do that for his own contract, is he able to make them do that for, to keep Tee Higgins in the building to go in a different direction than they would normally do? Either way, that whole dynamic is incredibly interesting to me, because Burrow is not the guy making that decision, but it would be a hell of a statement to just say, okay, not only has he come out consistently appealing for us to make this decision, he's been so adamant about it that he's shown a blueprint of how we could do it financially, publicly. Again, he's been on shows showing this is how we can make this work financially, for us to then turn around and go, yeah, no, we're going to go in a different direction. We're just going to let him walk. I mean, it would be a hell of a statement.
But if they keep Chase and Trey Hendrickson, that's going to be the challenge for the Bengals. Chase is due his payday. Hendrickson needs a payday. He's still in the middle of his prime. And if they let Higgins walk or they try to tag him, and I don't know how much that upsets Higgins. If they let Higgins walk essentially and they don't sign him long term, I think that's still doable. I mean, it's still that I don't think that's insulting necessarily, like 2 out of the big 3, and then you figure out how to, stitch together wide receiver 2. But yeah, I think it's still tough for Cincinnati to keep everybody, without a defense that needs to be overhauled, new scheme. Jermaine Pratt asking for a trade right now yesterday for the Bengals. I mean, they've got a lot of work to do beyond just the stars.
I mean, maybe they're doing this internally, but it would be interesting, if the Bengals went to Joe Burrow and said, "Okay, look, we can keep one of Tee Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. Pick like which one do you want to keep on this roster more because we can't financially make it happen to keep both of them without sacrificing here, there, and everywhere, right? And make that case to him, like." That would be interesting if you pitched it to him that way and said, we can keep Tee Higgins, but it means we have to lose Trey Hendrickson, or we can keep the best defensive player we have and figure out another direction for wide receiver 2, whether it's the guys that are already on the roster, like Yosivas, or whether we draft another guy. That would be fascinating. But if it's literally just like Burrow's out here campaigning to keep everyone, the Bengals are just like, we're going to stay cheap. We're going to get younger and cheaper, always, right? We're not going to break our rules. We're going to go in a new direction. We let Jesse Bates walk. We're going to do the same thing for Tee Higgins. Like, if they just did that without caring that Burrow's out here campaigning to keep everyone, I'm not saying it would, like, break down the relationship or anything, but it wouldn't be good.
I think the Bengals have already made moves that are Joe Burrow led, right? I mean, they built an indoor practice facility. Like they've already done stuff that they didn't do for years. So, when we're driving down 71, there's a nice bubble that they could practice in now. They never had that before. Been through the stadium. They've redone the locker room and everything underneath. I mean, they feel like little things, but for a Cincinnati team that hadn't done that for years, I think Burrow's been the driver there. So it'll be interesting to see how much he is a driver for their team building strategy. Because, oh, by the way, they have an offensive line that needs to be sorted as well, right? There's other places that need help, again, besides just the stars in Cincinnati. Either way, Higgins, if he hits the market, every team that needs a 1 or that wants to be aggressive and needs a 2, or already has a great player and wants to pair him with Tee Higgins, I think they're all in the market for Tee Higgins. Some of the other interesting names to me, Darius Slayton out there. He's been a pretty good deep threat throughout his career, but again, just Keenan Allen. I mean, we're starting to get down here. The free agent class, once again, not great. You're not in. You don't want to. Do you want to pay a Darius Slayton like $10 or $12 million a year? I think that's where the influx of receivers from college football over the last couple of years through the draft. There's a lot of names that are probably going to get paid a ton over the next couple of years, but like getting your receivers through the draft has been a pretty good move. And that's why this class, I don't know who you end up paying here. Keenan Allen, another one of those former big names, uneven year this year with Chicago. Pretty good possession guy still, but, I don't think he's going to be a game changer at this point in his career.
No, like there's definitely some interesting names out there to fill out a receiving core. Like, you could bring, I mean, look at the touchdown machine that Nick Westbrook-Akina was this year in Tennessee. He's only 28 years old. Like, he's an interesting component of a wide receiver core, but obviously he's not your number 1, probably not your number 2. Greg Dortch is a fascinating, like, dynamic slot weapon that can come in and be, that player for a team. But Tee Higgins is the one guy out there that you would have, like, reasonable confidence in being a number 1 if that was the hole on your depth chart. For Tee Higgins, for a second, where do you think he should land in terms of the contract he gets? Because he's, again, like the one big name, the one big star, the one guy that could theoretically fill that number 1 receiver role. But he's not like, I mean, nobody's ever going to confuse Tee Higgins for Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, like A.J. Brown, like the superstars. But does the market put his deal into that kind of category?
Probably where Ayuk landed. 30 per year, because you have Justin Jefferson at 35, CeeDee Lamb at 34, AJ Brown at 32, Amon-Ra St. Brown just over 30, Tyreek's at 30, but he's 31. That was groundbreaking at the time. Ayuk landed at 30, and you would say he's a 1/2, right? You'd have you came in with a similar question. How much is he a product of Shanahan? But oh, by the way, he's a really good route runner. He could still win on his own. He's probably a 1 for most teams. I think that's where Higgins is, right? He's been in this place where he's been the 2 for the Bengals, but when Chase got hurt a couple years ago, he kind of took over. You're right, though. The missed games are an issue for Higgins. He's missed a lot of time over the last couple of years, but I think that's where it is. Jalen Waddle's at 28, probably the 28 to 30 range. And then
Waddle,
higher cap, desperate team, maybe it lands at 30. If you're New England or whatever, and you have to drag people up to New England nowadays because the roster's terrible, you might have to pay 32 or 33, and it feels like an overpay, but you have to do it.
Yeah, I think Waddle is probably a better comp. I think Ayuk is a significantly better receiver than we've seen from Tee Higgins so far. Waddle might make sense in terms of being the second guy.
I wouldn't say significantly better. I think they're comparable, man.
I think he's been significantly better. He's way more dynamic. He's more explosive. You've got the question mark of how much of it is a product of the Shanahan offense, but I think he can do a lot more than Tee Higgins can. But that's again the problem with trying to keep him in Cincinnati, right? Is that theoretically, you're gonna have to pay Chase. Chase's deal is going to have to look like Jefferson's, which is $35 million a year, market resetting, right? He's going to have to be essentially the best paid wide receiver in the NFL. So if that deal's coming, then you've got, so if we're stuck with that for Chase, we don't want to be paying Tee Higgins more than, $25 million a year. But the market, because he's the only prize out there, is probably going to have to push him above $30 million just because there are other teams out there that will pay that. So now, if you want to keep him, you either have to go to crazy money for 2 wide receivers, or you have to convince Tee Higgins to take a $7 million a year haircut to stay in the building, which, maybe, but feels unlikely.
Yeah, Chase will at least be up in Jefferson range plus, right, at this point?
Yeah.
That's why it's tough to keep both. That's why it's difficult to keep both in Cincinnati. Anywhere else or anything else on the receiver pass catcher position here?
What about again the players that are not the non guys on the list that may end up as available? So the Davante Adams is of the world.
Is Davante just tied to Rodgers? I think he's 33. I think there's still something left in Adams' game. It's funny because you can look at age and just say, well, this guy's 30 or this guy's 33. Don't you have more faith in what Davante Adams can do at this point than, say, DeAndre Hopkins? 2 guys that were maybe the top 2 receivers in the NFL at any given stretch 6-7 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago even. Don't you feel a little bit better about what Adams can bring to the table, the way he played? I thought he played well with the Raiders and had uneven quarterback play.
Yeah.
And when Rodgers finally started playing better statistically, it coincided with Davante Adams, in the second half of the season. I think he could still play.
Adams still looks good. Yeah, I'm okay. His age, you're sort of concerned in terms of how long that's going to last. But yeah, he can absolutely still cook right now. Obviously Deebo Samuel has already asked for a trade. He's potentially available out there in the trade market. DK Metcalf is a guy that's been talked about as potentially being moved in Seattle for a while now. I wonder if he would be available for teams.
I think more realistically, they're going to cut. We'll talk about cut candidates. Tyler Lockett is high. I think it ends up being DK and JSN staying in Seattle. But yeah, look, if there's rumors about Trevor Lawrence calls, I would call about DK. I would make that phone call, at least to Seattle, call John Schneider.
Yeah, there's a couple of names out there which, would be interesting at wide receiver that are not theoretically free agents.
I think that's the bottom line for this offseason, which is Chris Godwin coming off of an injury. I put him in that Adam Thielen, and I always make this first-year Andrew Luck, Reggie Wayne connection. He could be this really nice possession receiver later in his career, maybe help a young quarterback along. He might be a nice 2 for Jaden Daniels opposite Terry McLaurin, for Drake May in New England, whatever it might be. But I believe the offseason, the story here is going to be the trades at the receiver position. As far as, building the receiving core, I think there's trade potential. I think there's there'll be a lot of rumors, but I think that's where a lot of the big news is going to come out more so than the free agent class.
And then the other one is whether any team can convince the Jets to part with Garrett Wilson, who apparently is looking to get out, right? Like if that's something he can force, and like, because Garrett Wilson would immediately become by far the prize, I think, of this free agent.
Oh yeah,
this offseason, right? If you could actually convince the Jets to part ways with Garrett Wilson for a first-round draft pick and whatever, I mean, that's a way a team can fix a receiving core.
And then you're probably going to have to pay him $30 million soon.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's worth 30, but again, supply and demand, I think, I'd make that call as well. See how much they are looking to reset. So interesting group of pass catchers on paper, some older names plus Tee Higgins, but I think the trade market is going to be rich. We'll hear a lot of stuff going on here.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.